that. Then at that time, the Secretary of State in the Trump administration was a guy named Rex Tillerson. And come to find out, we literally walked on the sidewalk 30 feet from his front door. Do you know how hard it was for me to not go just ring the doorbell? And so many famous people in that neighborhood were walking through it. And then there's this house on a corner with all these Suburbans, black Suburbans all around it. And I began to figure out who it was, what it was, and sure enough, it was the home of Ivanka Trump. In those days, they were highly guarding that house. But keeping to walk through this neighborhood, it dawned on me this was also the neighborhood that the Obamas had moved into. So I thought, I want to see their house. But I got to the corner of the street their house is on, and there was a police car there, or a security car, and a guy kind of leaned against it, so I thought, I'll good old boy him. I'll get on my best Texas drawl, and he'll escort me down there to see the house. That was not true. He explained to me that no matter how long I'd paid taxes, no matter who I was, that street was off limits. Their house was somewhere in the middle of that block. Just to give you an idea of those houses, because this was published, I know that their house was about $8 million. Now it's kind of like Forest Park Boulevard here in Fort Wayne. Houses were really not any greater in size for the most part than those homes, and that same kind of elegance. But I found it so interesting because I couldn't get access. I did think about this. I probably shouldn't tell you all these thoughts that go through my mind. I thought, well, they won't let me go down the street in front of it, but it backs up to this street of houses. What if I just cut through the neighbor's yard and go in the back way? Fortunately, Grace is able to control me most of the time. So I couldn't get in the house where the former president lives, and I couldn't get in the house where the current president at that time was living. I couldn't, just because I'm an American, enter their presence. This series, this month of November, is gratitude. And this week, I want to talk to you about how gratitude is for us the entrance to where God lives. I'm here to tell you there's angels all over the place around God, but I have unlimited access. And when I go into eternity, I'm going to have unlimited access to his heavenly house. One of my favorite passages of Scripture is in John chapter 1, verse 14, and I like how the Message says this. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. We saw the glory with our own eyes, the one-of-a-kind glory, like Father, like Son, generous inside and out, true from start to finish. The Creator of the universe so badly wants to relate to us. And this barrier of sin had to be broken for that to take place. And that's why he sent Jesus. The Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. When you go to Bethlehem, I don't know how to break this to you gently, but Jesus was not born in a little red barn behind the house. It was very likely a cave that had been turned into a house, and there was a portion of the cave where the animals were kept. And that's where Jesus was born. He moved into the neighborhood. So how do we get to know God? I think one of the things that is so important and what separates the kind of faith we live is that we are not about religion. We're about relationship. We're about direct access to God. We're about being where the creator of the universe has personal relationship with you and with me. And we need to understand this. We have direct access to the throne room of God. This last summer, back in Washington for another conference, we toured the Capitol building. And we got to go out onto the porch where the Speaker of the House staff can go out and where he can go out, but we still couldn't go in his chamber. I'm a tax-paying citizen. I know there's only how many million of us, but I can't get access to the highest levels of our government. And I'm okay with that because I have access far beyond their dominion. I can go to the very throne room of God. Psalms 22 verse 3, the New Living Translation says it this way. Yet you are wholly enthroned on the praises of Israel. King James says he inhabits the praises of his people. It's where God lives. Literally, this is another element of this, and I'm going to talk more about this in just a minute. I talk a lot about this because I think this is so important for us to fully grasp and embrace. God living in us, we are the tabernacle that his throne is in. The very throne of God is inside of you. That's where he lives. And you and I have been created to be tabernacles, containers, tents to house the very glory of God. No one's going to stop me at the head of the stairs. No one's going to say, you can't go down that street. No one's going to say, that's the speaker's private chamber. You can't go in there. I can go in there and swing in the chair. Never will forget when we were in Los Angeles a few years ago for a Foursquare conference. And Grace and I were on a tour of, at that time, what was the national office that was in a high-rise office building that Foursquare owned and has since sold because they were trying to be very judicious and really we don't need that much office space in today's world. But in those days, we had the building and there was this elegant office for the president. I say elegant, it was not all that ostentatious, but it was pretty nice. And so when we were on the tour, there was a whole group of people who were part of Foursquare in the island of Papua New Guinea. That's where they were from, wasn't it? And so they were on this tour, and they were so excited. In those offices, there's a couple of floors on that building that were Foursquare offices. Every rendition of the Foursquares that you ever want to see were in those different rooms. You know, slight variations here and there, but the Foursquares that are kind of the icon of who we are. And so it was so funny because in every one of those, they all either had their tablet or their phone, and they were snapping pictures of each one. I think they were going to go home and have them printed out and hang them. But then we got to the president's office. And they all had to sit in the president's chair and get their picture taken. Because Glenn Burris wasn't there that day, so they could. And then we got back to Amy's house, which is right next door, and there's plain signs that say, do not touch the bed, the piano. One of them set their Coke can down on this grand piano that was Sister Amy's. Another one just laid down on her bed, made themselves right at home. The problem for me was our tour guide had looked at me when we started the tour, and he said, I want you to be the one who's at the end of the tour to make sure everybody is staying with us. So you just make sure that everybody's moving along with me. He did not understand that when he assigned me to about 30 people who were for the first time in the U.S., who are very devout people with Foursquare, and they have an opportunity to be in Amy's house, they have an opportunity to be in the president's office, they could care less who I was. I would hear them speaking perfect English till I asked them something, and then they would go into a native dialect. So I was pretty frustrated by the time we were finished. I've gotten saved since then. It's okay. But I thought, isn't it wonderful at the end of the day that they knew who they were in relationship to the leadership of our denomination? But isn't it even more wonderful that we have that same kind of access and there's not even any signs on the furniture that say don't touch when it comes to God? We are welcome in His presence. I believe with all my heart that God desires to recreate the walks in the Garden of Eden with His children. I think that was so heartbreaking for God as He looked forward to coming down every day and walking with Adam and Eve in the garden. And now sin kept that from happening. So important for us to know this. God being exalted transforms us from the narcissistic desires we have to be recognized so that we can learn what it means to be exalted in a healthy environment. Because the exaltation of God is not because He demands it. It's that when you begin to think of that omni-nature of God, He's omnipresent, He's omniscient. All of those characteristics of God, that means He encompasses everything. It is just wow. Wow. And I can enter His presence. He is inside of me. How could I think any other way than gratitude? Because this is the kid who thinks about running up the stairs in the White House, cutting through the backyard of the Obamas to go where I'm not supposed to go. And I won't even tell you worse things I've thought. Before you get too self-righteous, you have your set of them too. And to think that with all the frailty that sin left in my life, I can enter the omnipresence of God. And gratitude for that is the entrance to His presence. Because it will let us then experience His presence the way it should be. It's important to also understand this. Let me dig this a little bit deeper. That not only is He with us, rather, He is actually in us. I do spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's because it's hard for us to fully grasp this. I think it's hard for us to fully wrap our head around it. And we need to wrap our head and heart both around it. Jesus was talking to the disciples. He knew it was just a short time, that He wasn't going to be here with them every day when He was on earth with them. It's in the third year. It's just days before He's going to be crucified. And he's wanting them to see it's more than just what you're experiencing right now, far bigger picture. And he wanted them to understand it was far more than just the supernatural they could see. It was what they could experience. So John 14:17 says this, "The Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive and take to its heart, because it does not see him or know him, but you know him because he, the Holy Spirit, remains with you continually and will be in you." And that wasn't just a promise to them. That is the ultimate significance of new birth reality. Nicodemus, a great student of Jewish tradition and how to live it, was fascinated with Jesus. And he heard Jesus say, "You've got to be born again." And he's trying to figure this out. He's a grown man. And he goes so far as to say, so I don't know, how would I get back inside my mother's womb to be born again? And Jesus says, "Nicodemus, you don't get it. I'm not talking about this flesh birth. I'm talking about the real you. The part of you that is more alive than the physical dimension that you're used to. I'm talking about being born of the Spirit." God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. God created us in his image. So that means we were created as a spirit being who has a body or lives in a body and has a mind. But the real you is what's on the inside, not is what is on the outside. And he says the empowered Spirit of truth is going to empower your spirit. What do you not understand? Keep asking God to show it to you. One of the things I've learned is God's timetable is not our timetable. And sometimes his end results look differently than what we think. I knew with all my heart in the year of 2001 that God was saying to me, "I'm taking you out of Florida because I'm going to do a lot of hurricanes there in the next 20 years. And I'm going to move you to Indiana where there's never been a hurricane." And I knew when I got here, it was exactly where I was supposed to be. But I thought my assignment was to recreate the church I'd been a part of for more than a decade in Florida, in Fort Wayne. And you know what? It didn't quite work out that way. And I'm okay. Because God had a plan I couldn't see at the time, with opportunity to have impact that in itself wouldn't have produced. Because God had other thoughts. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. But when we submit to him, all of a sudden it becomes so different, and we begin to understand, wow, God's got it. I don't know what you're going through right now, but if you're in a tough place, the last chapter hadn't been written. There's still more ahead for you. You ladies that are going to graduate this afternoon, I'm so excited for you. You are starting on a whole new dimension of life. There's still going to be some of the challenges you're dealing with right now, but you're going to watch God walk you through those. He's preparing you for what he has ahead for you. God has amazing things he's going to accomplish as you just trust him. And that's for all of us. Because the truth is that not only is he with us today, but he's in us. This building is not the house of God. This building houses the houses of God. You are the house of God. You're that tabernacle I talked about that has the very Spirit of God inside of you. You know, the interesting thing was in the Old Testament in the Bible, you had to go into the Holy of Holies in a man-made temple. That temple has been demolished now for a couple of thousand years. But the Holy of Holies is more real than it's ever been. The difference is now it's in here. The very holy holies of God is inside of you. It's how do you touch it? Do you stand at the bottom of the stairs and look up to the next floor and say, but I can't go there? Because you have an enemy who guards and says you don't have a right to. You shouldn't have access. And the good news is, in this case, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords says, yeah, he's mine and I'm in him. He can go anywhere he wants to, and I'm with him. When we begin to grasp that, when that begins to take hold of us, what that begins to do is the continual presence of God that's now with you and in you, you can't help but feel gratitude. I don't deserve this. I didn't earn this, but it's mine. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I don't have to do them in my ability. I do them in his ability. If I'm totally honest with you, in the natural, I some days get overwhelmed thinking about what we've launched into at Ball State. And the enemy says to me, what were you thinking? You're now doing this, and you're going to be made the fool in front of all of Foursquare. I'm okay with that. Because if Ball State doesn't happen, it's not on me if I'm available and do what I can do. Furthermore, God's hand is on it. It may not look like what I think it's going to look like today, but it's going to fulfill the will of God. And you know what's the most important part of that? It's not the little church building down there that we're going to repurpose. It's the students that have come there to school. When I think that this holiday season we're going to begin touching international students that have come to the U.S., what if they get more than a degree while they're here? What if they get a master plan for life? What if their world is totally rearranged? What about students from the U.S.? We live in challenging times. But I'm going to tell you something. I have a lot of confidence in Gen Z and millennials, because I know both in those generations people that have such tender hearts for God and that I'm watching God use in powerful ways. And I get to be part of that. You get to be part of that. That's what it's about. And when I think of that, there is a humbling that takes place. But what gratitude that he is with us and he is in us. Little homework assignment. This week, every time you look into a mirror, I want you to say, he's with me and he's in me. This week, when you mess up and you cuss, oh, I don't ever do that, Pastor. Well, okay. When you do, I want you to say, he's with me and he's in me. You know what's hard about that? You don't feel like that when you've just gone off on somebody or when you've used a word you shouldn't use. You ever notice that? That afterwards you're thinking, oh my, I hope nobody was around that knows me. I don't know how to tell you this, but the one that matters the most was right there beside you going, I can't believe you just said that. And he's inside of you. And he doesn't say, so you do that, I'm done. No, he says, you're still being transformed. is still taking place. He is with us and He is in us. Your best moments this week, I want you to remember that. Your worst moments this week, I want you to remember that, because you're going to have worse moments. Here you go. Say, Pastor, that isn't very positive. I'm positive you're going to have some worse moments this week. It's going to happen. And I want you to remember, He's with you. He's in you. And here's the exciting part. It's not just that it's there. The interesting thing is, have you ever been around somebody who's a hoarder? There's a whole lot of reasons I'm glad God brought Grace into my life. But one of those things is this. It isn't a real long time between times when Grace says, boy, the closets are getting to be a mess. Got to go through them. And I know that if there's anything that I really value, I better hide it. Because Grace is getting rid of the old, out with the old, in with the new. I keep praying that she never gets me mixed up with the old. But the thing is, I'm so thankful she's not a hoarder. I mean, remember years ago when I was doing sales in homes, one night I went to a house, and literally these people, I had been in the bedding business before. I was in the home improvement business. And when I walked in the house, I was fascinated because they had this expensive velveteen that, if you're old enough to remember when headboards frequently were made out of velvet and bedspreads, that kind of material that they had bought. And they didn't bother to make curtains. They just cut them to the size of the window and stapled it to the window frame. I'm going to tell you, velveteen stapled to a window is not very pretty. And literally, when they invited me in the house, we went through the entryway, through a couple of rooms, finally back to, I guess, was kind of their den or family room. And literally, there was a pathway that was about this wide through the house to where then there was apparently, if I remember right, there was a chair that was cleared enough I could sit in. And everything else was filled with stuff. God help us to not have to keep everything to ourselves. Are you a person that can't have very many friendships? You got to control the people in your life. Are you married or live with someone? Don't nod right now. Do you live with someone who has to control everything in your life? That's not fun. And the truth is, God wants us to understand He's in us and with us so that we can begin to live in the overflow from sharing God's address with the world. John 7:38. Believe in me so that rivers of living water will burst out from within you, flowing from your innermost being, just like the scripture says. It's a fascinating chapter in the book of Ezekiel, and you're going to go read it and say, what in the world does all that mean? If you've never read it before. But it really is a description of the throne room of God, the throne of God, and the river that flows out from under the throne that all life comes out of. Revelation 22 also gives reference to this river of life that comes out of the throne of God. And it's interesting because the headwaters of any river is where it originates. And the headwaters of life are in the throne room of God. Before you were formed, God knew you. You came out of the headwaters of His life. Everything did. And when we begin to understand that, then here's what we begin to know. That this river of life flows through the throne, and this headwaters of our river flows from the life of Christ in us. Believe in me so that rivers of living water will burst out from within you, flowing from your innermost being, just like the scripture says. Remember, Jesus is inside of you. The throne of God is in you. Because the Bible tells us out of your very innermost being, there will be these rivers of water that begin to come out of the Spirit of Christ being in you. And it's out of that it begins to flow so that you begin to live your life and you begin, the reason I'm not worried about Muncie is it's going to come out of the overflow of the Spirit of God inside of me and all those who are going to be working on it. It's going to be the flow that is the overflow of God. And if you're a believer, there is an overflow that is coming out of you. Tap into it. Don't dam it up. Don't do anything to stop it. Release it so that you can live in the fullness of God. And the overflow of our river, what's the secret to that? It's beginning to enter in His presence with thanksgiving. It's beginning to worship God. We're in this Thanksgiving season. May it not just be limited to turkey and ham and cranberry sauce. Not even just pumpkin pies. May it be this reality that I am who I am by the grace of God. And create such this spirit of gratitude that now that gratitude begins to keep me in touch with God. If you're having a rough week, just begin to worship God. I don't know what your kind of worship is. I'm involved in something I had no intention of getting involved with that's going to come here this next summer. And there's a guy who grew up in Fort Wayne that has gained a lot of recognition in Christian social media as a rapper. Antoine Hill is his name. He was here last summer and 1,000 people showed up in a church parking lot on the south side. This year we're going to do it somewhere downtown. I've got asked to be involved. I will tell you this. If you die without Jesus in your heart, you go to a rap concert, from my personal perspective. But I realize other people, that's their thing. And if it causes kids to get saved, I'm all for it. Some of you still love the Gaithers. That's okay. Some of you love groups that I don't even know because they're so new that I haven't heard of them. But some of you know elevation music. I at least know what that is and enjoy it. I love listening to Charity Gale because she's a strange mix of old and new. And what I've found is that when I begin to get into a place where I just get quiet and begin to play worship music that speaks to me, I'm now in a place where the Spirit of God can unfold. And out of that, guess what happens? I'm now on the second floor. I'm not just going through the backyard, I'm sitting on the patio with God. Gratitude takes you to where God lives. And when we begin to live that way, it begins to change everything. Pastor Betzer that I work with in Florida used to tell a great story. I didn't ask his permission to tell you this, but oh well. He told me that one time he was in Washington and had a few hours. So he had been before. He went down to Mount Vernon, the home of Washington, which Grace and I were at the last time we were there. And he said they were on a tour of Mount Vernon, and he said it began to rain. And the tour guide said to all of them, we need to quickly come out of the house and head back to the visitor center because I don't want you to get caught. Sometimes when these rain showers come, they just pour. And let's quickly get back there before that happens. And he said he just kind of hung back. And in a minute he realized he was the only one there. And you know how in those kind of places they have the velvet ropes attached to stands that you're not supposed to go on the other side of? He said all of a sudden he realized he was on this side of the velvet rope, and on the other side was a rocking chair that George Washington used to sit in every day. And sitting on the table next to it was a pair of glasses that George Washington wore. And he said he thought to himself, you know, nobody's here. So he just stepped over the rope, sat down on the chair, put on the glasses, and just rocked. Now, George Washington wasn't there, but it had to have been an incredible experience. I don't think he can be arrested for me telling the story, but he was in a place where it connected him with the founder of our nation. Where's the rocking chair? Where's the glasses? What is it that lets you connect to where God is? Because what that does is it releases in you this amazing sense of who you are. Yet you are holy, Psalm 22:3 tells us, enthroned on the praises of Israel. Where's God's throne? Where does God live? I can tell you this, grateful worship is the entrance to where God lives. So this week, could I challenge you to every day, just take some time and begin to give gratitude to God. First of all, for who he is. Secondly, for what he's done. Secondly, for what he's doing now. Thirdly, for what he's going to do. Because God still has great plans. You hear me say this a lot around here. The best is yet to come. Do you know what releases that? Gratitude. What are you complaining about right now? What is it that you spend your time all caught up in what you're unhappy with? Are you living in the spirit of Martha from the Bible or the spirit of Mary? Both were in the presence of Jesus. Martha saw it as work. Mary saw it as opportunity to spend time with him. Are you living way too shortchanging of the potential of what God has? Does it mean you live in denial of the negatives? Not at all. It's just that you don't let the negatives control the dialogue. You bring the negatives and you lay them at the foot of the cross and trust that God will make a way through it. And then when you begin to think about him, you begin to have gratitude. I think this month is a wonderful opportunity to prepare us for the Christmas season. Because the Christmas season has its own issues, doesn't it? Got to buy presents for everybody, got to send out cards, gotta. And so we sometimes miss it. I'm ready for it this year. This week, we have a cedar tree in our front yard that I put red lights on every year. I used to put them on when it was 30 degrees. And all of a sudden, one year it dawned on me, I don't have to wait till December to put them on. So this week, I was out putting the red lights on our tree. Not plugged in yet. I did plug them in to make sure they work. But they're not plugged in yet, but they're ready to go when Christmas rolls. I'm going to celebrate. And I thought about the gratitude. I thought about Christmas. And I'm excited for the days that are just ahead of us. If you're dreading Christmas, let it go. If you're worried because you spend too much money, then this year, just send everybody a note and say, I sure do love you, and I know you love me enough that you don't want me stressing over spending money on you, so I didn't. Now, it's their problem, not yours. Let there be gratitude for all that God's done. Key that starts all this is Jesus coming in your heart. If you don't know him today, it's simple. I'm going to pray a prayer in just a minute, and you can pray it with me. And that prayer is going to be an invitation from you for Jesus to come in. If you're online with us, right where you are, you can pray this prayer, and Jesus will come in. I'm going to ask everybody in the room to just pray it with me as an affirmation for the folks that are going to be praying this for the first time. So would you just bow your heads for a minute? Just pray this prayer. Say, Jesus, come into my heart. Forgive my sins. Give me eternal life. I receive you now. Amen. If you're online, you just prayed that prayer with me. Send me a note. Let me know that. I've got some information I want to send you that will help you in your walk with God. I'm going to ask members of the prayer team to be here at the front. If you have any kind of need, they'll be glad to pray with you. If you just prayed that prayer, you just asked Jesus into your heart, let them know that, because they'll give you that information that will help you in your walk with God as well. Don't forget, we're in the middle of Operation Christmas Child, and you got 2 more weeks to get the boxes back. And if you haven't gotten boxes yet, here's the good news for you. There's still some boxes here. You can still grab some and still be a part of what's going to happen with it. Well, I just encourage you this week, remember this, don't judge your pastor for all the confessions you've heard this morning of all the places I've gone I wasn't supposed to. Be grateful I didn't get caught. Have a wonderful week.